Hi there, I'm Dr. Malie Coyne, clinical psychologist, NUIG Adjunct lecturer in psychology, and also author of the book Love In, Love Out, A Compassionate Approach to Parenting Your Anxious Child. I'm absolutely delighted to give you this talk today, which was organised by Galway Public Libraries as part of their Healthy Ireland at Your Library talk series. Galway Library are very close to my heart because I live in Galway and I absolutely love the work of all our libraries around the country, and I really encourage what they are doing. This talk is for parents, for teachers, or for anyone who works with children to help to manage a child's anxiety or any other big feeling they might be feeling. We all feel anxious sometimes, and that's okay. So this talk will be helpful for a child of any age or any level of anxiety. The reason I wrote my book is that I was an anxious child, so I know what that feels like. And also I am a parent to 2 children, so I know what it's like to grapple with trying to help your child with their anxious feelings. And also, as a clinical psychologist working with children and families every day, I've seen that anxiety has been on the rise, and parents often find it difficult to know how to help their children. So really what I was trying to do was facilitate that communication between children and their parents. I use learnings from the likes of attachment theory, compassion-focused therapy, and because my book is so practical and it offers a step-by-step approach, I'm going to be doing the same with my talk today. I'm absolutely delighted to have contributions from the likes of Louise Shanahar on mindfulness, Siobhan Prendeville on play therapy, and also Pamela Carroll Mannion on the use of cognitive-behavioural therapy with young people who have anxiety. And also have a little bit of a Q&A that I did recently with Brian Penny. So I really hope you enjoy this presentation, and thank you again to Galway Public Libraries for having me. So the book is called Love In, Love Out, A Compassionate Approach to Parenting Your Anxious Child. And as I said, it's great to do this for Galway Public Libraries. So common human feelings right now, if we think of how people are feeling at the moment, we've had a year of a pandemic and there's no sign of it ending anytime soon in terms of timescale. So common human feelings right now for our children and for us are uncertainty. That's a big feeling at the moment. And anxiety, overwhelm. So I think that's why this talk is so relevant. Loss, grief and sadness. I suppose loss at, what we used to be able to do. This is for children, teenagers, parents. I think, thankfully most of the kids are back to school. Some are not yet, but it's the loss of being able to have human connection, with grandparents and with friends, and the loss of enjoyed activities. The loss for other people of livelihoods and, maybe people, being sick or, being very much affected by COVID, and other issues at the moment. Social isolation. We're very, humans are very social species. So the idea, the kind of being away from each other is causing a lot of difficulty. Not having face-to-face contact, people working from home, not being able to see people, and it's been really difficult for kids and teenagers as well, as we know. Pandemic fatigue at the moment in terms of how long more is this going to go on for? When is everybody going to be vaccinated? Frustration. For some, there is a relief at the slower pace of life. I've done many webinars and talks to parents in the last few months and spoken to parents on the phone and online. And for me, myself, even as a parent, like the weekends there's not much to do at the weekends, but sometimes that can make you deliberately slow down because you're like, okay, well, what am I going to do today? well, I'm going to do some baking, and we're going to, have a, shower the kids, or go for a walk or whatever. And everything just kind of slows down. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I think some people will be bringing some of what they've learned forward with them, that all the rushing around we were doing pre-pandemic wasn't necessary. I remember there was one parent at one of the webinars who said that he brought his child to 3 birthday parties in one day pre-pandemic, and kind of went, why were we doing that? It's this kind of fear of missing out. So there might be some relief for some people. And then also with feelings, I talk about shame there, throw in shame for some. So when human beings have feelings, particularly the more negative kind of ones, we might feel ashamed for having those feelings. And sometimes when kids feel anxious, when parents feel anxious, they feel ashamed for feeling that way. Like, why am I feeling this way? I shouldn't be feeling this way, So I think that can make things worse. And also, as I said in the beginning, feelings are similar for parents and for children. So I think it's important to acknowledge that whilst your child is going through some feelings and difficult feelings, you are as well. And everybody is in the household. And that's what's made things, I suppose, quite difficult, for people in the last year. Resilience. I talk a lot about resilience in my book, and really that's the ability to resist or bounce back from adversity and not break. And I think it's important to kind of know that, I always talk about resilience as facing a manageable threat with a soothing presence by your side. So for most of us, COVID has been a manageable threat. And what I mean by that is it's been difficult. Don't get me wrong. It's been really, really difficult for many. But it's been what we call manageable. And when children have had loving caregivers by their side, the soothing presence of parents and of people who look after them, that builds resilience, because kids can only learn to go through difficulties if they go through difficulties. We call them positive stresses. And so therefore, I think, even though I know lots of people are asking me, and, I get media requests, and, not just that, but just people are wondering, is COVID going to have really impacted on children and teenagers' mental health? And there's no doubt that it has in many ways. But I also think that for a lot of children, a lot of teens, a lot of parents, it will have built resilience up, because we've been going through what we never thought we would have gone through. This time last year we were there, but we would never have thought that we would be able to go through lockdown the way we have. And I think that builds strength and resilience. And so, and encouraging your child's independence, letting them do one thing, for example, today that you didn't let them do yesterday. We're starting to let the kids go out on their bikes on their own around where we live. Obviously I have gone out on bike rides many times with them, so that they can learn the ways to be safe. So I think that's important to kind of, they say if you let your child do one thing today that you didn't let them do yesterday, that will help to build up their independent skills and help them to feel empowered. So in my book, I talk about this formula: anxiety plus compassion equals resilience. That's why I talk about the compassionate approach to parenting your anxious child. And resilience is like a muscle. So it's about, when you're exposed to kind of positive stresses. And as I said, the positive stresses could be encouraging your child's independence, but positive stresses can also be the regular difficulties that children can go through. Like, say, if they feel like a friend doesn't want to play with them, or they're having, even the rows that can happen at home. Rows are very normal at home, and they can be considered as stresses that we can recover from, because it's all about, when I talk about attachment, I talk about a third of the time it's about when you're tuning into your child. A third of the time there's rupture, where you're not quite tuning into them, or else they're kind of giving you, they might be coming across angry, but there's sadness underneath it. There's a need underneath it. And then a third of it is repair. So I think repair is this fertile ground upon which these brain connections are made, and where they learn, where your children children learn that, you know, following a row we can repair, and they will start to do that in their own lives. And I think that's really important, because nobody is perfect, and we all have, so as a parent it's really important. I do say to my children regularly, you know, I'm sorry mommy was a bit shouty last night, mommy was very tired. And I don't say, but you shouldn't have done this. I just kind of leave that for another time, because a repair is not, you don't have a but in a repair. You genuinely apologize if you feel like you might have been out of line. And I think it's really important to do that, and it'll teach your children to do that as well. So the child-parent relationship is the single most important factor which nurtures resilience in children. And what I want you to say to you about that is that there is no pressure. It's all about good enough parenting, and you do not have to be perfect. It's all about tuning into them a third of the time, rupture a third of the time, repairing a third of the time, okay? And so, you know, resilience is, you know, when parents see problems more as opportunities, then that can kind of help to build resilience. And also, like, if you kind of see problems as being like challenges that you can overcome, and they can see that from you, that you're modeling that for them, and they will see problems. They're more likely to see problems in the same way. And so there we go. Modeling how we think about things as parents has a huge bearing on how our children will. So will the pandemic having a lasting impact on children? And I know that's a big question for parents. I've read a really good article about it that talked about like the amount of exposure that children have had to it. So in other words, you know, for children and teens, say, who may have had direct exposure, whose lives have been impacted in a really big way, obviously that will have more impact on them. But I think I need to say a but there, that research has shown us from research that has been done after wars, after other pandemics in the past, that if children have loving and calm caregivers, and I'm not saying you can be calm all the time, because none of us can, and we have been challenged as parents way like beyond what any parent could ever be challenged with in the last year. But it's about kind of having this soothing presence with your children, and about, you know, loving them, and like you're watching this talk because you've good intentions and you love your kids and you want to learn more. So there you go. You have a great start there. And they also say another thing that helps children is if there's a higher calling. So I'll read this to you here. I have it here. It says, a connection to something greater than oneself, whether it's spiritual practice, cultural beliefs, or a sense of purpose, can help families and children orient their thoughts, feelings, and actions. Children, even young ones, very young ones, enjoy and benefit from this. So in other words, like if you've been getting more into nature in the last year, I know that, you know, I like using little angel cards with the kids. It's just a nice thing. Or even acts of kindness, you know, baking for the grandparents, or making a nice card and sending it to them, doing something nice for somebody, obviously in a COVID safe way. This higher calling tends to help children and adults, you know, when you feel like there's more to life than, I suppose, your day to day, that there's this higher calling. It's about your values as well, and maybe even talking to your kids about what parts of normal are worth rushing back to after all this is over. So what is compassionate parenting? I suppose for me, what I see is compassionate parenting is all about the connection between the child and the parent, which is focused on the value of emotion. So in other words, emotions, I know we have positive emotions supposedly and negative emotions, but that all emotions are welcomed with your children. You know, say my daughter was upset this morning about something, and, you know, I could have just said, oh, you know, get on with it and, you know, it's fine, you know, but because, you know, to a grown up, sometimes the children's emotions can seem a bit like, why are you, you know, where's this emotion coming from, and why have you become upset all of a sudden, and all that. But I kind of knew she needed to go through the tunnel of that emotion, and I needed to hear her and to really listen to how she was feeling, and to kind of just like be calm and just, you know, put my hand on her and just let her know that I was there for whatever was coming, if there was more tears, and not question her about that, because we all need our feelings to be validated. If you were upset, what would you need from somebody? You'd need somebody to listen to you, to reflect back what you're saying, and to, maybe giving you a loving hand to say, I'm there for you, and that's what your children need, even though it's difficult sometimes for us to manage our children's difficult emotions. And there are very real reasons for that, which we'll come back to. It's about slowing right down and trying to see what lies behind our children's feelings and behavior. Remember I said there about a third is tuning into your child, a third is rupture. Well, very often, say an anxious child can come across maybe as being angry, for instance. It could come out as anger, and yet there's anxiety underneath it. Or a child might misbehave, but there's something really going on underneath it. So what I'm saying to you is, I've done this brilliant circle of security course a few years ago, and it was all about, like, when your child expresses an emotion, they need you to organize their feelings. And even though that might be really difficult when they're presenting it in a way that's hard for us to hear, it is still an organize my feelings situation, which a parent needs to help their child with. So compassionate parenting is all about treating ourselves with compassion as parents so that we can do that for our children. And we'll talk a bit more about self-care in a few minutes. And also compassion helps us, self-kindness towards ourselves helps to lower stress, anxiety and low mood. And it also improves self-worth and resilience. So it's a no-brainer for me. I felt like this was the approach I wanted to use. It comes from compassion-focused therapy, which is a therapeutic kind of model that I've really enjoyed using in the last few years. And that's why I applied it here. And I think it's really important. So I love this quote. If we want our children to love and accept who they are, then we must love and accept who we are, including our imperfections. So none of us are perfect. Even like my daughter says to me now, nobody's perfect. Everyone has an issue. Everyone does, and, a lot of parents go around with like this negative voice inside their heads that says you're not good enough, or why did you do that, and you shouldn't have done that, and this real critical voice. And a lot of kids walk around and teenagers walk around with that voice, which can really be impacted on by how you feel. If you're feeling anxious or if you're feeling a bit low, that voice tends to get louder. And I used to think that it was a question of like telling that voice to go away, and in really kind of like defending against it. But then I learned during a training last year or 2 years ago that actually it's about befriending that inner critic voice, because that voice is there to keep us safe. That voice is there to tell us, stop, there's a car coming, or you better be safe in this moment. But that voice can just get a bit loud sometimes. So I like to think of it as you turn the critical voice down and you turn the compassionate voice up. And what I mean by that, say I do with kids sometimes, say if they have a really negative thought about themselves, like I'm no good, I'm not a good friend or something. And rather than me say, oh, but you are a good friend, it's about, oh, you don't feel like you're a good friend at the moment. I wonder, is that kind of and that's a hard way to feel, Pet, and I wonder, is that kind of the bully voice coming up again? And I wonder, is there a kinder way to look at that? I wonder, could we, say if your best friend came to you and said, I'm not a good friend to anybody. What might you say to that best friend? What might you say? Or what's a way to say something in a kinder way? And I do that with kids sometimes where, they might have a real negative thought, and I might kind of say, what might be a kinder way? So the kinder way in that situation would be, with that friend on that day, I wasn't as good a friend as I could have been, but most of the time I am, and I'm aware of it, that kind of way. So it's like, kids who are anxious in particular can have very black and white thoughts. So we're not trying to tell them, no, you can't have that thought. We're just trying to kind of turn the volume down on the really negative thinking and trying to bring a kinder voice in. And I think it's really important for us as parents to model, kind of being kinder to ourselves. So in other words, if you hear a critical voice, like sometimes I might say, oh, Malie, why did you do that? Or you idiot, or whatever, something like that. And it's like, I need to be really careful how I talk to myself, for my mental well-being, because if I talk to myself negatively, it'll impact on my mood and my self-esteem. But I also need to be careful about how I speak to myself in front of my children, because that will become their voice with them. So anxiety is all about, for a child and an adult, about overestimating harm and the likelihood of harm and underestimating your ability to cope with that harm, basically. And I think that's a really interesting kind of way of looking at it. So anxious children and parents will overestimate the harm that's there, and they'll underestimate their ability to cope. So what we really need to do to help a child with anxiety is we need to kind of, look at their estimation of harm and kind of go, is there a way for us to reduce that down? But most importantly, we need to build up their coping tools, because if they feel they have a kind of a big toolbox to help them with that, then they'll be able to deal with anxiety provoking situations in the future. So main causes of anxiety, and I think that's a really important thing. I was an anxious child, and I think I'm one of the 15% of children who has a more anxious temperament. And very often when parents come in and they say, oh, my child is really anxious, I might say to a parent, does your child remind you of anybody you know? And sometimes an anxious child can have a parent who's anxious, or a grandparent who's anxious, who has a more anxious temperament, who might have been born that way. We're not blaming anybody. We're just saying, and sometimes if your child is anxious, it can make you anxious, because we all have this freeze response when it comes to managing difficult emotions sometimes. Kids can get anxiety or kind of more likely to have it from observing key adults in their lives, because anxiety is contagious, as we know, and anxious children may also have anxious parents. And then sometimes I find that there can be a trigger. So whilst the child may be a bit more anxious, but it's kind of low grade, a trigger can happen. Could be the lockdowns during COVID. It could be a grandparent dying. It could be like nearly drowning in a pool, whatever it is, it could be their dog dying, anything that really impacts on them, an accident, a significant loss, and it really shakes their sense of safety. So I think that's really important. When a child feels anxious, it shakes their sense of safety. So the most important thing we need to do as parents is to help them to feel safe. And that's why I talk about compassion. And that's why I talk about this relationship between you and your child. So anxious children will focus more on results rather than the process. Sometimes they'll be like, well, I'm not good enough, but they're not focusing on the effort they make, and they might feel less in control of their lives. So we're trying to empower them. So I find that in this modern society, and I kind of would have said this pre-COVID, I don't know, it's hard to know where we're at with this, but we all have a tricky brain, which means that our brain attunes to negativity. So in other words, because our brains are focused on negativity, say, 99 people say something good about you and one person says something bad about you, your brain will attune to the negative comment. So that's why we have a tricky brain. The brain can't tell the difference between burnt toast and a building burning, because it has the exact same response in your amygdala here, which are behind your ears, that you perceive this threat, your amygdala kind of gets fired up, and next thing, it starts producing these fight or flight chemicals like adrenaline and cortisol in your brain and in your body, which makes your body think, oh my God, there's something really bad here. And then the thoughts start to arise like, oh my God, this is terrible. And you start to fight, flight, or freeze. And so, we do have tricky brains, and our brains haven't changed much, I suppose. And we also have this negativity bias, as I said, and we also have this tendency to compare ourselves to others. So when we see images of other people having a great time, or when kids see, other kids doing this, that, or the other, or their friends meeting up or whatever, although they're not meeting up now. And I think that's probably what has helped with COVID, is that there's this less fear of missing out because nobody's doing anything, But we have these tricky brains, and then we've got this kind of overwhelm from, the world, the busyness of the world pre-COVID, this kind of pressure on children and teenagers to be, they have one chance at a leaving cert or a junior cert, or they have, the pressures of even social media and trying to keep up with everybody else, and the busy lives we were leading. And for me, I call that the perfect storm. So I love this metaphor. I use it in my parent groups with parents, and I've also used it, and I put it into my book because I really thought this was a good one to to kind of show you how a child feels when they're anxious, or in their shoes. So I'll read it from my book here. Imagine this. You're traveling along the motorway when your brakes feel as though they might fail. They're working, but something feels off. This has never happened before. You drive the car to the closest mechanic. After a thorough inspection of the car, you're told everything is fine and there's nothing to worry about. So this person, imagine this is the anxious child, okay? You get back on the motorway and the same thing happens. Your brakes seem to be working, but they don't feel right. You take the car back to the same mechanic and again you're told that everything is fine and there's nothing to worry about. You're told this with such certainty that you start to feel a bit silly. Maybe it's not the car or the brakes. Maybe it's you. You're feeling worse now, more confused and wondering if the problem is actually with you. You get back on the motorway, your brain keeps reminding you about what happened last time and the time before, and you don't want the same thing to happen again, but it does. You drive to the mechanic and again you're told that everything is fine and there's nothing at all to worry about. You're encouraged to keep driving, which you do, but you avoid the motorway. You're ready to open your loving arms to any explanation that could make sense of your moody brakes. If it's not the car, maybe it's the motorway. Makes sense, right? The easy solution is to avoid it. It would be ridiculous to keep doing the same thing in the same place when it feels all wrong, so that's what you do. Can you imagine how it would feel when everything inside you is telling you something is wrong, but the person you trust keeps telling you there's nothing to worry about? Now imagine what would happen if you heard this. Since you've been avoiding the motorway, the car has been fine. The more you do this, the more certain you are that something about the motorway causes your brakes to feel fragile. This works beautifully. No motorway, no fear of brake failure, no worries. Easy, until the day the motorway is unavoidable. You're on the motorway and it happens again. It makes no sense at all and it's terrifying. This time you find a different mechanic. She looks over the car and says, "Well, it's no wonder you felt as though the brakes were failing. The car is absolutely fine. It's fabulous, actually. But there's this little thing that happens when the car is at high speed that causes it to feel the way it does. It's no problem and it happens a lot with these cars. As it's being explained to you, it makes complete sense. Best of all, it's compelling proof that it's the car that's the problem and you're not losing your mind. The mechanic explains how to stop the car feeling the way it does. She tells you that this strategy might not work straight away, it can take a bit of practice, but at least you know what's causing the trouble and you can feel safe." Well, what did you think? And this is back to me talking. What I love most about this metaphor is that it normalizes anxiety for children and their parents and firmly lays to rest the idea that there's nothing intrinsically wrong with the person experiencing these big feelings. When I use this metaphor to explain anxiety to parents, it always seems to hit home, paving the way to a new understanding. It paints a picture of how anxiety affects our physical sensations. Your brakes seem to be working, but they don't feel right. Our thoughts, you're feeling worse now, more confused, and wondering if the problem is actually with you. Our attempts to avoid the problem, the easy solution is to avoid it. And on the negative cycle this creates. This works beautifully. No motorway, no fear of brake failure, no worries. Easy, until the day the motorway is unavoidable. You're on the motorway and it happens again. It makes no sense at all and it's terrifying. So in other words, it talks about how anxiety can impact your physical sensations, your thoughts, and also makes you avoid situations that make you feel anxious. But consider this. If the child is the driver, the parent is the first mechanic. When the first mechanic said everything was fine and there was nothing to worry about, the child felt lost and confused as their body was telling them otherwise. So you see, this body reaction has already taken place. So if you tell your child that they're fine, when the fight or flight chemicals have already started to go through their bodies, they are going to it's going to stop them from trusting in their own bodies, and they're going to be like, but my body's telling me that there's a burning building, so why are you telling me everything is fine? And that's what happened, I suppose. That's why I wrote the book, actually, to really increase the understanding. So cue the same response again, and the child felt there must be something wrong with them. As the feelings got worse, the only solution was to avoid the motorway altogether, which worked up to a point, although it maintained the idea of the faulty brakes. On the other hand, when the second mechanic took the time to look over the car and explained what was happening, the child felt such relief that they weren't losing their mind and that there might even be some hope that the situation could be improved. When your child is anxious and something doesn't feel right, you are their hope. Now I just need to repeat that. When your child is anxious and something doesn't feel right, you are their hope. When they perceive a threat, their body's alarm system is activated, causing a chain reaction of symptoms in their body and in their mind, one of these being to recruit your much needed support. Because we don't like seeing our kids in pain, parents often feel a huge responsibility to fix it, which may prompt them to tell their child there's nothing to worry about. The problem is that this chain reaction of mental and physical symptoms is already in motion, and it can't be stopped unless the child is made to feel safe. While parents are desperately trying to make that happen by reassuring their child, what they don't realize is that their child can't process this type of information when they're feeling so unsafe. They need a different type of adult feedback, one that involves addressing what they're feeling right now and riding the wave of anxiety with them, without trying to lift them off. Although it's really hard to stay with, the wave won't break them. When we believe it, then they can start to believe it too. So this is why I wrote the book, I suppose. In my mind, I was kind of saying to every child and grown-up child who feels anxious out there, this one's for you. I've been there and I'm holding your hand. I hope this book gives you voice and does you justice. When I was an anxious child, I suppose I had stomach aches and I was afraid to go to really kind of crowded places. And my belly was telling me that there was something really wrong. And I suppose I don't want to go into the details of exactly what was going on for me at the moment. But I remember I was given this placebo drug, this white powder, after being brought to the doctor. And I remember I didn't know it was a fake drug, and my brother and sister kind of said, "Oh, do you know that's only a fake drug you're taking? You don't really have stomach aches or whatever." And that really hurt, I guess. And I felt like the adults around me, there was a lot less known about anxiety at the time, but I don't feel like my anxiety was understood and that it was kind of showing that there was something deeper going on with me. And that is why I wrote the book. I really wanted to help parents to understand that when these physical sensations have started, that telling your child there's nothing to worry about is not actually acknowledging where they're at. And parents are afraid to go down to the level of worry with their child or to acknowledge it for them in case the child stays there. But emotions are like tunnels, or they're like waves, and we need to ride them. We don't have to run away from them. So, a really important thing for children, and I have a lot of sections in my book on explaining anxiety to children, and you can do this with your child yourself, is kind of, asking them how their body feels when they're anxious. So say here, for a child, they drew, my head feels fuzzy, my heart beats faster, butterflies in my tummy, need to go to the toilet more. And then, sweaty hands, sometimes I cry. What kind of things make me feel anxious? School, food, tests, parties, mum and dad fighting, whatever it is, and that could be a nice little thing to do with a child. And I suppose, rather than saying I am anxious, for us to say I feel anxious in this moment, because just because you feel anxious doesn't mean you'll feel that in a half an hour or even in 5 minutes, So you are not your feelings. So we are not our feelings. And if we help our children through their feelings and not deny them their feelings, they'll go through that tunnel quicker and come out the other side. So you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. And I just love that. As I said in my book, anxiety is like a wave, like any feeling, it will come and then it will go. When the wave comes in, it can feel really scary, as if it's going to drown you. But the reality is that if you ride the wave by yourself or with someone you love, it won't actually harm you. Although it feels like one of the most horrible feelings in the world, I know. It doesn't last long and it goes away after a while, especially if you tell someone how you're feeling, try to ride the wave, take some deep breaths, or jump around a few times to let all the tension out. And we'll talk more about those techniques in a second. I am delighted to introduce to you Louise Shanahar, who contributed on to my book. And she is a children's therapist, a mindfulness teacher, and a psychology lecturer. And she has written the Mindfully Me and Kindfully Me book series. And she's just brilliant. I just thought when I'm doing something on, I'd like to do a section on, I was thinking mindfulness and kindfulness, which is like self-kindness in my book. And I did an interview with Shanahar, and I was so delighted to do that. She gave me such beautiful ideas. And then for my book launch, I asked her to give me a few minutes of insight where I ask her things like what mindfulness is, how mindfulness and self-compassion are helpful for anxious children, and why befriending anxiety is important as opposed to kind of denying it, and why it's important for parents to be good friends to themselves, and this whole idea of compassionate parenting. So here, say, Louise wrote in one of her little worksheets, remember, your thoughts are just like clouds. They are only passing by. Write, draw, or tell someone about some of the thoughts or feelings you have had today. So thank you so much, and I'll be back in a second.
So we can kind of define mindfulness kind of quite briefly by saying it's when we bring our attention to the present moment and on purpose in a non-judgmental way. And I'd always bring in, and this is where what I feel is really important, in a kind and compassionate way. Yeah. Okay. So we're just connecting to the here and now, because a lot of the time we're not in the here and now. So the research shows us about half of the time, 48% of the time, we're not in the present. So it's connecting to the present and also bringing love and compassion and kindness to the present.
And for a parent of an anxious child, I'm wondering, how does mindfulness with self-kindness or self-compassion, how can it help a parent or an anxious child?
Yeah, well, it can help them in so many ways, and the research does support this as well. And I suppose a lot of anxiety, you know, it's very much caught up in worries, and worries in particular maybe about the future. So with mindfulness, we're connecting to the present. We're bringing the focus back to the here and now. And the kindness and compassion part is very important, because when children or anybody experience anxiety, often there's a lot of anxiety about the anxiety. So there's like this extra layer of suffering that we get worried about the pain in my tummy. You'll hear kids saying, I have a pain in my tummy, I have a pain in my head. And the same with adults. So when we learn to befriend our feeling, that helps us really cope with it, and helps children and adults become a lot more resilient, and they can deal with it. It's not trying to get rid of it. That's important. It's actually meeting it, and meeting it with kindness and friendship and compassion.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's kind of about not trying to get rid of it, but kind of letting it, helping parents to be with it and helping children to be with it.
That's you also very important. Yeah, that distinction. Yeah. Brilliant. We're not trying to get rid of it.
No,
we're trying to befriend it. It's part of us, and it can have, people who tend to have anxiety or children tend to often be very sensitive, very creative, and there can be good aspects to it in a way, and how it manifests in our personality with the sensitivity. So we're not trying to get rid of it, but we're just trying to cope with it and befriend that part of ourselves, so it doesn't just take over.
Okay. And once we befriend, it tends to kind of take its natural course.
Yeah. And then it tends to,
Yeah. You wrote in my book, because I interviewed you for my book, and it said, you highlighted the importance of parents nurturing their own well-being and asking themselves, am I being a good friend to myself in this moment? Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because I'd say parents would like to know.
I think this is absolutely vital, really, because children are, and I know it might sound a little bit scary, but children are really learning a lot of the time by how we are, not necessarily by what we say. So they're learning by modeling of the parents. So if a parent can bring, and the idea is like we can only give what's in our cup. So say we want to give our child orange juice, but in our cup is tea, we can only give them tea. If we want to give our child apple juice and we have like coffee in our cup, we can only give them coffee. So the idea is that we're filling up our own cup with these kind of practices of being kind to ourselves, being compassionate to ourselves. We're modeling that, we're living that, and then the children are just learning from just being around us. We don't have to kind of say anything, It's just how we are. So we're actually from our being then we're showing our children how to be kind and compassionate and towards themselves.
That's lovely. So actually being, and we both have our cups, and pouring that in, actually them seeing you in your rather than say be kind to yourself, that you're actually practicing it. And it's helpful for your parents to see, for your kids to see you do things for yourself. Thank you so much, Louise. Can you show us your book, your series of books that my children absolutely love them. Show them to me.
Yeah, so it's there's 3 books. So we have it's all there. It's illustrated by Rose Finnerty. Where is Happy, which brings in a lot of the self-compassion, and this one is good around anxiety. Look Who's Here, which talks about the feeling like as like visitors, like I said, and can we make friends with our feelings? You know,
that's lovely.
I have Worried Walter here. Can we make friends with Worried Walter? And on the back is suggestions. Parents can make those little cards for themselves and give Worry a name. And
your website.
Yeah, it's www.louiseshanaher.com.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And you've lots of resources and free, and resources, and then people can get hold of those on your website as well. Thank you so much, Louise.
Oh, and thank you.
So I want to thank Louise for her contribution there. As she said, we can only give what's in our cup. So I suppose it's about modeling calm and self-kindness to our children, which is why self-care is so important and was actually the first step of what I call the safe chain of resilience in my book. When I was coming up with the idea for the book, for me, I felt like parents needed clear guidance as to a stepped approach to helping their children with anxiety. And I kind of, designed it based on how the brain processes information. And that, when children are in an anxious mode, they can't really use the reasoning part of their brain, the problem solving part of their brain. They need to feel regulated and soothed before they can problem solve. So they need help in that moment with those fight or flight chemicals. And that's why, saying to a child there's nothing to worry about when their body has already started going crazy with those chemicals is not actually going to help in the moment, that we need to soothe and regulate them first. But in order for us to do that, parents need to make sure that they're minding themselves, because if we don't have time for ourselves, or if we don't prioritize our self-care as a parent, then we're unable to kind of model calmness to our children. And, when, say, you've done something that soothes you, you're much better able to make a calmer parenting decision. Say if your child starts shouting or screaming or something's going on and you've just had your cup of tea and relaxed for a little while, you're going to be calmer coming into that compared to if you've been, really stressed all day. So, and that's why bedtime can be such a hard situation, because we're all running out of energy at that stage, and kids are tired, we're tired. I find that the hardest time anyway. So the safe chain of resilience, self-care, it's about how you look after yourself as a parent and regulate your emotions. And it's about reflecting on that. The child's priority in that situation is my parent contained enough to contain my anxiety? And that's why I wanted to, I suppose, write the book and talk about the importance of self-compassion. Because if we're not okay as parents and calm as parents, and if our approach is kind of very nervous and reactive, then it's going to be very difficult for us to help our anxious child. Anchoring, how you can help your child feel safe and secure. It's about regulating their emotions, and it's where your child's body is telling them there's something very unsafe going on here. And, those fight or flight chemicals have started, and I'm going to give you some anchoring strategies that you can use with your children. The next thing is feeling felt. It's this lovely idea by Dan Siegel in his book, The Whole Brain Child, that talks about how you can help your child feel connected and understood in a moment. And it's about relating to your child, and their priority there is, am I loved? So it's about validating their feelings, unpacking their worries. We'll talk more about it. And then empowerment. Really, I suppose when you're anxious and fearful, you feel very out of control. So we want to empower our children. We want to help them to manage their anxiety, help them to problem solve it. We can't get to that fourth E before we get to all of the others first, okay? And so reasoning can't happen unless we regulate and we relate. And none of those can happen unless you have self-care as a parent. And the child's priority in the empowerment phase is, what can I learn from this? And we'll talk more about that in a second. So self-care, that I use this kind of idea of a lotus. in my book. I love the idea of the lotus, and there are 5 petals on the lotus, one for physical, psychological, emotional, spiritual, and social. And I use an exercise in my book that encourages parents to look at each of those areas of self-care and see, what am I currently doing for each of those areas? And is there one thing that I could do in each of those areas, or even pick 1 or 2 of those areas? Is there one practical thing, like, so say you enjoy walking, but you never get out to go for a walk. Is there a way that you can prioritize doing that? Say, build it into your habits, and sometimes you'll need help from somebody else to be able to achieve that, be it a spouse, a friend or whatever. And I know obviously we need to be safe during COVID and everything, but, it's important to prioritize. Like, say an example is, you don't want your child to continue being on their screen, but you know that the extra 15 minutes will give you a chance to do a bit of yoga or whatever for 15 minutes, or to do a bit of jumping around, and that'll make you feel better. Well, then in that situation, let them stay on that screen, say, for another 10-15 minutes, if it gives you a chance to replenish yourself. So it's about finding balance as a parent. And I'm not suggesting you should leave them on screens the whole time. I'm not at all suggesting that, but I know a lot of parents have been feeling guilty in the last few months about that because of COVID and everything. But, we were trying to do the safest thing for our children. So, I think everything in moderation. So why is self-care so important? Caring for others takes up a lot of energy and a lot of patience. And neglect of self-care, you know this yourself. It leads to you feeling irritable, overwhelmed, sad, anxious, stressed. We've all felt that way, by the way. It also leads to a weaker immune system and high blood pressure. So you end up getting sicker and feeling sick. And a louder critical voice. Do you remember we spoke about that? When we're feeling sad, anxious, that kind of thing, that voice gets really loud. We start to berate ourselves more. And it's important to catch yourself in those moments. You are your best resource. So what does self-care look like? Self-care is, it's about achieving balance and filling your cup to nurture all of your roles in your life. So you're a parent, you are a person, first of all, with your friends and your like your family. You are a parent, and you may also be, and most likely you're a worker as well. So there's lots of different roles in your life that are going on. And I feel that self-compassion is like the healing balm of self-compassion, and that stress, when, by the way, this was a huge learning for me, when we feel stressed as human beings, not only do we release the cortisol and the adrenaline that I spoke about, from the amygdala hijack, we also release oxytocin, which is our bonding hormone. So when we are stressed, when your child is feeling anxious, when you're feeling anxious, we release this hormone that makes us want to bond with another. And that's why the whole idea of anchoring your child, helping them to feel felt, is really important before you go into reasoning mode, because they are releasing that oxytocin. They need you to meet that oxytocin with soothing and love. Self-care is about restoring physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and social balance. And, in my book, I have plenty more information on each of those. And it's about remembering our mindfulness, which mindfulness is all about. And as Louise said, it's about awareness of the present moment without kind of judging it. Common humanity. I love this idea from compassion focused therapy, which is we all struggle in life. We all can feel anxious sometimes. And this is what it feels like to feel anxious as a human being right now. And putting a hand on your heart, this self-kindness, and going, this is what it's like for me right now. So those 3 elements of self-compassion are very important. So recognizing when we need self-care, right? So physical signs, you'll recognize when you get headaches, disturbed sleep, fatigue, when you're feeling low, run down, you get sick. Mental signs would be like poor concentration, forgetfulness, tension, depression, anxiety, substance misuse. Emotional signs like crying, angry outbursts, that kind of thing. And by the way, this applies to children and teenagers too. Social signs like excessive isolation, getting triggered easily. If you're getting triggered quite quickly, which I know it can be difficult because, having kids and having been home with them so long in the last year, it's been difficult. But, you know, it's important for you to recognize when you need to look after yourself, because sometimes that is when you drop the ball of looking after yourself. Another way is to, when you see yourself like this, very frustrated and unable to kind of finding it hard to cope, that is when you need to start thinking about, what do I need right now in this moment? You know, like say, you know, I'm thinking of like showering one of my kids and her screaming, shouting and whatever. And I know that I needed in that moment, even though I wanted to run out of the room or the bathroom and but I know that what I needed to do in this moment is not react. And I needed to breathe in, 2 breaths in through the nose and a deep breath out through the mouth. I don't need to say a word in this moment. I just need to try to calm myself down. Shark music. This idea is amazing, and it comes from Circle of Security Parenting, a group that I did a few years ago and that I've been teaching ever since. So it's this whole idea that came up. It's whole idea of showing parents 2 videos. Okay, so the first video, they're exactly the same visual. So it's about somebody going down a path, this lovely path with trees all around them, and they're going around this path and they come onto this beach, but there's beautiful classical music playing in the background, and the parent, you're asking the parent, how do you feel in this moment? And the parent is like, oh my God, I feel amazing, and there's such possibility, I love this. You show the same exact video clip to parents with the Jaws soundtrack in the background. Na 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 na. And then the parent is like, you ask them, how do you feel in that moment? And they're like, oh my God, I feel really scared. You know, I don't know what's going to come near me. This is really scary, you know, that kind of thing. So in other words, it's kind of, so a parent coined the term shark music. It's like the echo of your childhood wound. If you feel frozen with any of your children's feelings, usually that tends to mean that one of your parents was frozen to those feelings in you as you were growing up. So say I sometimes feel frozen when my children have minor little hurts, you know, like, oh, I hurt this and I hurt that. Not a big hurt, but a small hurt. And I know where that comes from. And it's like this frozen feeling that I feel. And even though I feel it, I have awareness of that feeling. And that doesn't mean I have to ignore their need in the moment. I become aware of how I feel in my body. And then I go against the feeling almost. I fake it till I make it. And I go, oh, are you okay, pet? Even though I'm not feeling it, I fake it almost. And that we all have this shark music. It's almost like you're used to going like that with your arms. You know, if I was asked you to cross your arms right now I want you to cross your arms with the other arm on top. Okay, so we all do this and do things in automatic ways, including the way we parent, which came from how we were parented. And what I'm asking you to do is cross your arm in a different way, is to become aware of where you get triggered. And if it's a very difficult thing for you to kind of deal with, if there's been a lot of trauma in your past or there's been situations that have been difficult, I would say talk to somebody that you trust or go and seek professional help if you feel that that's what you need. So I love this quote by Viktor Frankl: between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. I just absolutely love that. So I think that's really important. So it kind of helps you to breathe in and out, calm yourselves, and realize that we have a choice in how we react with our children. And definitely I've seen this in action, where I might feel a certain way, like I'm going to explode or I'm feeling very triggered, and I just take a few breaths. I might leave the room or stay there, take a few breaths and go, it's okay, Malie, it's all right. I can deal with this. Okay. So blame is a dead-end street. You know, Maya Angelou has this lovely quote: I did then what I knew how to do. Now I know better. I do better. Okay. So it's not that we're kind of trying to blame parents and saying you shouldn't have done this, you shouldn't have done that. I always feel that blame never leads to learning. Blame leads to defense. So we need to be compassionate towards people's situations, and there's always room for learning, including for me and for everybody else out there. So Roisin Joyce, this lovely psychologist in Galway, said, please don't underestimate the impact of using a kind and gentle tone of voice when relating to yourself. If you don't use warmth in your relationship with yourself, self-care activities become just another chore, something that has to be done as opposed to an act of love. So it's not just because Malie said you have to do self-care. It's about kind of learning to relate with yourself in a kind way. And that's a really important thing. So compassionate self-care for parents might look like balancing enjoyment, achievement and connection every day. You know, doing something you enjoy, doing something even small that makes you feel like you've achieved something, connecting with other people in whatever safe way you can. Making time for daily self-care. It can be just a few minutes a day, good sleep, work-life balance and boundaries. Saying no sometimes means saying yes to you. Becoming a steward of your senses. If there's stuff that's triggering you, be it online, on the news or wherever, choosing not to switch that on, choosing to switch it off. I found that watching the news was getting a bit much for me a few weeks ago. I needed to take a break from that. Finding ways to cope with stress, focusing on what you can control, asking yourself, as I said, what do I need right now in this moment? Dedicating me time, committing to yourself, seeing it through, and having a support network are really important. Anchoring your child. This is the second step of my safe chain of resilience. And it's about kind of, you know, this quote, when their storm meets our calm, co-regulation occurs. So that's really an important, sorry, I'm just getting my book here. That's a really important thing. So in order to realize the worth of the anchor, we need to feel the stress of the storm. I love this idea of a parent being an anchor for a child and helping to soothe them when they're in that fight or flight kind of mode. I just wrote in my book, an anxious child needs just this kind of anchor, an emotionally healthy parent who is solid and reliable, firm and constant and stable and secure, not perfect, but good enough, one who has weathered a few storms with their child. As your child's emotional anchor, you will need your anchors to hold you steady too. As you'll know from your own life, finding out who your anchors are becomes clear in times of challenge, like the ones we live in at the moment. When life is good and our needs are being met, when our environments feel safe and familiar, and when we feel secure in our close relationships, we feel free to let go. So it's only when we feel safe and secure that we feel free to learn, to explore our environment. We test our limits, we try out new ways of being and behaving. In the same way, when an anxious child feels safe, they will allow themselves to float until they feel the tug of their anchor and come back to replenish the sense of safety they need. When your child feels threatened in any way by their environment or by their own fearful thoughts, they are more likely to retreat closer to you as their emotional anchor and less likely to explore their world. It is like they are battening down the hatches for a storm. Whilst this shows their attachment towards you and seeking your comfort and support, there is a fine balance to be reached between holding tight and encouraging them to let go. And this is the classic issue of parenting. Holding your child tight, letting them go. In helping our children feel anchored, we must help them to feel safe when we're apart. Okay, so that's kind of really important. So I've got a few, really, I suppose in this anchoring section of my book, I talk a lot about the strategies that you can use. So I think it's really important to kind of note that, when children are feeling kind of, I'll go on to the next slide. Move it or lose it is kind of a technique that Dan Siegel came up with in his book, The Whole Brain Child. So in taking action to work through some of your anxiety, it's about trying out certain techniques. And really, anchoring techniques are about, when your child is in fight or flight mode, they release this adrenaline and this cortisol. And sometimes just breathing on its own isn't enough to help a child to soothe themselves. They need a way to move their bodies. So it's almost like this move it or lose it. So you'll either move it or you'll lose it. You'll kind of lose it in terms of losing your cool, So when you have this adrenaline, this cortisol rushing through your veins, it can really help a child to use their senses to calm them right down. Even this double breath in through the nose and breathing out through the mouth. Even looking out the window, looking at the horizon, using your most powerful visual sense to look and to see the horizon can immediately help you to see that there's more to life than the little nitty gritty thing you're worried about in that moment. It's not to say your worry isn't valid, of course it is. So And I think before we use anchoring strategies with our children, we need to do a self-check. What constitutes safety in a child's environment are the subtle safety cues from the adults around them. That might include your facial expression, the tone of your voice, the calmness in your body. It's less what you say, but how you show your genuine affection for them. It might be difficult for you to switch into safe mode unless you feel calm inside, which is where this self-check comes in. So even asking yourself as a parent, what's happening inside my nervous system? What tone of voice am I using? What is my body language communicating? Do I feel safe right now? Cultivating safety to mirror calm and containment is a tall order when your child is midway through an anxiety attack. So in those incredibly tough times, using your compassionate voice to answer the following questions. What do I need right now to feel safe? Do I need to take a deep breath, to take 5, to call someone to help me? What do I need right now? And then the anchoring strategies that I use, these stress reduction techniques, there's lovely ones that you can use with your child. One of them I really like is called shaking on purpose, which can be used to meet a child's high energy in fight, flight, freeze mode or to help them recover from being in frozen mode. Get them to jump up and down, scream or make noises and make their whole body shake. So you get them to shake on purpose, and you can do it as well. Join in. Because fight, flight, freeze blocks their natural expression of fear, shaking on purpose helps children to let some of their feelings out in a safe way. Another really good one I find is the Dragonfire Breath. Ask your child to link their fingers under their chin, inhale a big dragon breath through their nose and lift their elbows up to frame their face. Exhale, lifting their head up and opening their mouth wide to make a sound towards the sky like a dragon blowing fire. Lower the elbows back down to meet at the bottom by the end of the sound. This is a good energizing technique that helps them to build confidence. So it's kind of like, it's hard for me to do sometimes. Link their fingers under the chin, inhale through their nose. Okay, exhale. So it's kind of like, so getting them to do that kind of mode. And also you can get them to do like the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 game. This is a really good one for teenagers when they're in panic mode. And it helps for them to kind of get in tune with the here and now. Describe 5 things you see in the room, 4 things you can feel, like my feet on the floor or the air in my nose, 3 things you hear, like traffic outside, 2 things you can smell or 2 smells you like. Name 1 good thing about yourself. Another thing is a butterfly hug. Try this yourself first, then show your child. Cross your arms in front of you and pat your shoulders. Alternating right and left hand pats. Alternate gentle squeezes of each shoulder. Add on by visualizing a safe place in your head or silently repeating, I am safe, I am at peace. And you're alternating between the left and right hand side. It reduces anxiety as it activates both sides of the brain. Comforting touch also releases oxytocin, which helps disperse high cortisol levels, bringing your child back to a calmer state. If they're in school by themselves, I love the figure of 8, which came from an anxious child themselves. They use this exercise on their own. You can ask your child to imagine their index finger as a pencil drawing a figure of 8 on their skin, or using their big toe underneath their desk to draw a figure of 8. So what they're doing is, as they're drawing the first half of the figure of 8, they breathe in for 3. When they get to the second middle, hold their finger still for 1, or their toe. Then for the second half of the figure 8, breathe out for 3. When they get to the middle, hold for 1 again. Repeat 3 or 4 times, and you can practice this at home too. So there's lots of little exercises there that you can use to help to anchor your child. So next we're going to do a video with Siobhan Prendeville, and she is amazing. I did some of my training here at the Children's Therapy Centre. Play is the opposite of fear, so I had to use playful techniques in my book. I interviewed Siobhan for my book. And she is a child and adolescent psychotherapist, a play therapist, a clinical supervisor, author, presenter and trainer. And she's the course leader on the MA Creative Psychotherapy at the Children's Therapy Centre. And her mother, Eileen, is absolutely amazing. And I asked her in this video, and this is based on an interview that I did in my book. I did a case study with her in my book as well. Why play helps children take control of their fears, how parents can engage their children in short bursts of free play, how to soothe an anxious child using techniques such as Name It to Tame It, which again is from Dan Siegel, and creating, this is a great thing, creating a sensory box they can turn to in their most anxious moments. I hope you enjoy this.
Play is actually the language of children. So play is how children communicate. It's how they express themselves most naturally. It's how they can actually begin to gain understanding of themselves, of their own feelings, and begin to gain control of them. So it's really incredibly powerful. So play, can you believe, supports self-regulation, it supports self-expression, stress inoculation, stress management, building self-esteem. So when children get to experience these therapeutic powers of play, they get to be able to take control of those big feelings, anxiety being one of the big ones that's out there right now.
And I love, that's why I have a chapter on play in my book. Play loosens fear. Play is the opposite of fear, isn't it? It just is. How can parents best help their anxious children, Siobhan, would you say?
Okay, so first and foremost, don't shy away from it. We don't need to pretend that our children don't have fear or anxiety. It's really important that we recognize it and we validate it for them. So name it to tame it. So let them know, I see you. Instead of like, oh, you don't need to be worried about that. That you're really worried about going to the shops now because we haven't been there in a long time. Recognizing it, letting them know that you're there with them. You know, I see that and I'm here to help you with that. That's really important. Then the other thing, of course, play, like I said, play is how children gain an understanding of their feelings and gain control of them. So for parents and carers, I really would invite you to really allow your child lots of time to engage in free choice play where they're in control, where they're the boss of the play. I know lives are really busy, but to be able to set aside some special play times each week, even just like 15 minutes, where you're just with your child and you allow them to take the lead in the play. They're the boss of the play, they're in control, you're with them and you're just saying what you see. And that's going to really give them an avenue to express themselves, and also as they express themselves to gain an understanding of themselves and to start to gain control of some of the natural worries and fears that might be out there.
Absolutely. I mean, I think short bursts of quality time of play and where the child chooses are just hugely important. So any playful tips out there, Siobhan, for people who just want to get started? What would you say? Okay,
so I suppose the big thing to remember, right, when big feelings are about, language is down, okay? Those big feelings come up and the language goes down. So what we need to be doing is trying to reach out to our children in those moments of big feelings to seek to soothe. And we can do that by bringing really great sensory play experiences to them. And this is going to help to soothe them down. And if we need to go to any of the talking stuff after, we can. But very simple things that I would suggest to everybody is show you. Just gather a box with lots of lovely sensory fidgets in it, okay? So I have squeezy things in it. I have something that's nice and soft and fluffy.
Lovely.
Something that we're going to squeeze.
I love that. I love goo.
And so much proprioceptive input there into my body that can be really regulating and soothing for me. Things that we can look through. Something like this, you know, these lovely gel timers can be so regulating and soothing. So if you have like, create a box in your home where you just have a variety of different sensory based fidget toys that are there for use all of the time. See what your child goes to. Pay attention and see what kind of things do you see to soothe him or her. Might stimulate them. And then, of course, if you notice that they're becoming overwhelmed, you can guide them to it and you can be there with them in it. And what I know is you can make like a little smaller takeaway box that you can pop into the car with you. You know, if you are going to the shops and they're anxious about that, or going to school, maybe the anxieties are coming when they're going back to school. So in the car, you want to have a few of their favorite things that they can play with on the way. So that they're getting regulated on the way to a stressful event, and also on the reconnection when they come back into the car, that they're there for them again to help them to regulate.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Siobhan. Thank you. I really appreciate it. And if people want to contact the Children's Therapy Centre, I have the details here. You run lots of training courses. If people are trying to source a play therapist, or, you know, like a mental health professional who practices play therapy, you would say to contact the IAPT.ie.
Yeah, because there's a register there, you can put in where you are, and then different people will come up, make contact. It really is a beautiful journey. It is absolutely the most developmentally appropriate intervention that we can bring to our children and teens out there, because play is their way. Okay.
Thank you so much to Siobhan for helping us to understand how play can be helpful with anxiety. I love the sensory box, and that's something that you can use with your kids and can really help them to distract away from their anxiety in a particular moment. And all kids love, and it's using the 5 senses to soothe a child. As Siobhan says, play is their way. It really is. And also, if you want to find a reputable play therapist, the website is iaptp.ie. So here we go to the feeling felt part. And, there's a picture here. The capacity for self-soothing is born out of hundreds and hundreds of instances of being soothed by someone else. This idea came from Dan Siegel in his book, The Whole Brain Child. And I suppose what I kind of feel that is that every tough situation with the child is a precious opportunity to soothe their mixed up, underdeveloped kind of brains, because the reasoning part of their brain doesn't develop fully until they're in their 20s. So every experience of your soothing kind of firms up that brain pathway that associates, anxiety or difficulty with being soothed in a way. And this kind of soothing is all about like validating your child's emotions. This idea of really feeling like somebody gets you. We all have this need to feel understood, and that's what feeling felt is all about. So talking to your child about anxiety will not make them more anxious. Helping your child to understand what's going on inside their bodies helps them to feel less alone and more empowered. And unpacking your child's worries can really be a helpful thing to do, and I'll talk to you about that now. And I suppose what I also want to say there is that it's important to talk the language of feelings at home, where, although we can't control the messages that our children face when they're at school or with their friends, we can cultivate a place where emotions are heard and validated at home by using this language of feelings. And talking to your child even about how you manage feelings as well. So you can say, like, I felt anxious when I was about to do such and such, but taking a breath really helped to calm me down. Children of parents who use the language of feelings are better able to express and name their feelings, which is a really invaluable tool in life and to cope with anxiety. Like, I'm feeling this way right now, rather than I am anxious, I feel anxious right now. But that's okay, because we all feel anxious sometimes. The secret message, I love this idea of, I kind of wrote a little bit of a poem, I suppose you could say, but I was all about kind of this idea of, understanding the need behind your child's kind of communication. Okay. So feeling felt is all about relating to your child and helping them to feel calm and contained. And by helping them feel felt, our goal is for them to know that they have our support and to assist them in developing the capacity to regulate their own emotions by learning from our example. So if we help them to regulate their emotions, they will then learn to do that for themselves. And this enables them to use the parts of their brain up here that allow for true connection and rational reasoning. So, it's kind of about feeling understood. And so this is a kind of a poem that I wrote. So if your child's distress could speak, perhaps you'd hear it say, I need you to be with me in this really tough moment. I'm struggling with a really scary feeling. I'm so afraid and confused. I need you to anchor me to safety. Help, I don't know how to make it better by myself. Stay with me in my messy feeling. Let's breathe in and out of it together. Try not to judge or minimize it. Try not to rationalize or problem solve it. Gently guide me through it. Please don't push, as I'll get there in the end. You are my one and only. I need you more than you think. If not you, then who? And that's really important, I suppose, for parents to know that the reasoning part of their brain is not developed. So when children have difficulties with managing their emotions, that is completely normal, because their amygdala are running the show when they're that age. That's why they have these tantrums. That's why and then there's hormones for the older kids, and there's a lot of stuff going on with their brain development. And, you know what, even grown-ups who have a completely, you know, developed reasoning brain can lose it sometimes. So can you imagine what that's like for kids? So I think it's important for us to try to uncover what are the secret messages behind our children's emotions, and to understand that every situation that comes up is an organize my feelings situation. So I suppose I just felt with this feeling felt is that when we attune to others, we allow our internal state to shift, to come to resonate with the inner world of another. And that's at the heart of what's important with this feeling felt. Children need to feel attuned to feel secure, and to develop well. And throughout our lives, we need attunement. All of us need it to feel close and connected. So I think that's a really important kind of idea. And in our modern world, with all this focus on doing, feeling felt helps children to look inwards where their vulnerabilities are, but also where their kindness and their resilience is. And helping children to make sense of their mixed up emotions requires this empathetic response from parents. This can make parents feel vulnerable, because in order for the parent to connect with their child's big feeling, they need to connect with something inside themselves that recognizes it. This is understandably difficult for parents whose shark music is playing loud and strong. So it's important for us to be aware of how our children's feelings make us feel, so that we can be aware of that, and then kind of, you know, look after ourselves in that moment, breathe, or whatever we need. And if we need deeper reflection, that's what we need. And that'll help us to choose that calmer response, so that we're then able to anchor them. A really valuable way to actively tune into your child is to focus on the need behind their behavior, what they're trying to tell you through their behavior. That is the secret message behind their anxiety. So this is a great acronym that I use often, which is called HALT. And I know they use it in the addiction literature. Before you act, or before you even kind of respond to your child, it's important for you to ask yourself, are you hungry, angry, lonely, or tired in the moment? Okay. And very often we're one of those. Worse yet, if you're hangry, which is like where the anger or comes from the depth of your soul. Children very often can be hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. And we need to do that check. You know, very often a lot of emotions can come out at bedtime. That's not to say we say to our child, oh, you're just tired and don't worry about it, it'll be fine. We just say, oh, you're feeling, that's a really difficult feeling for you right now. That's really hard. That's one of my favorite things to say to my kids, is that's really tough. And to kind of, you know, let them feel it, and then kind of, and be aware in your head that it could be coming from any of these things. So it's important to take a self-care break when you're feeling that way, but also for you to be aware that a lot of our very reactive ways, or ways of being triggered, can come from being hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. Unpacking a worry. I'm actually going to do a case example here where, we're going to talk about the importance of unpacking a worry. So unpacking a worry is all about when your child feels worried, it can feel like a jumbled mess inside their heads, where they're kind of like, everything is bad. I have so many worries. And there's this lovely book by Virginia Ironside called The Huge Bag of Worries, where this little girl has so many worries. Jenny builds up a load of worries that she carries around in this heavy blue bag. And the worries are there when she goes to school. They're there when she's at home, when she's at swimming, when she's watching TV, all of the time, even when she's in the toilet. She tries ignoring the bag, but it doesn't work, nor does it throwing it away. And then she meets an old lady who says, what on earth is this huge bag of worries? And through her fears, Jenny explains the bag has followed her for weeks and has gotten bigger and bigger and just won't go away. The old lady suggests they open the bag to see what's inside. Jenny's reluctant to open it, as the worries might jump out at her, and who knows what might happen. But the lady says there's nothing a worry hates more than being seen. The secret is to let them out slowly, one by one, and show them to someone else. And so Jenny slowly lets her worries out one by one and is astonished to see how small her bag is once the lady has sorted the worries out into groups, like those that hate the light of day, those that belong to other people like mum or dad or her teacher. And then the ending shows a lighter than light Jenny, and the old lady throws the bag away. So I suppose for me, I just felt that this is a brilliant metaphor for the hidden worries many children can have. And that's why I love this idea of the worry box, which is in my book, that we use with children, where we get children to make a box out of, it could be a shoe box, and, you know, maybe once a week, you actually write down, and you get them to write down their worries on pieces of paper. Once a week, they put the worry, or they put all the worries into the box. You might add a few worries in there as well. And once a week, you take, you have worry time, which is an allocated time. You take a worry out of the box and you discuss the worry to see, to kind of talk about what it is. And then if it's no longer a worry, they can tear it up after you talked about it. But if it still is, they can rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, how big a worry it is, where 10 is really worrying and 1 isn't at all, and put the date next to it, so that the next time they go back to it and you talk about it again, you can compare their rating with the last time, or else you can tear it up. So that's a really lovely idea. It's about kind of sectioning off time for worry time. And so that when your child is worried at other times of the day, you can say to them, we'll talk about that during worry time. And it's only a certain time of the day. If your child is hugely anxious, you might want to do that more often. Maybe not just before bed, but keep the worry box in your bedroom, not in their box, and in their bedroom, and let them decorate it or whatever. It can really help. And I suppose I have a kind of a case study from my book where I talk about it. And it's I love this idea of unpacking your child's worry. And it's Rose and Lauren. So, a mother called Rose recounted the story of her 9-year-old daughter who expressed worries over her parents going away for the weekend while she and her brother stayed with her grandparents. Having overcome serious bouts of anxiety in her early years, Lauren was frustrated with herself for feeling so anxious about her parents' trip, and it was all made the worse by not knowing why she was feeling this deep feeling of unease. Mum had noticed that every time the trip was mentioned, Lauren seemed to withdraw and appeared down. Having had a lot of experience in dealing with her daughter's worries before, Mum picked a time when they were both calm and unlikely to be interrupted. Mum sat close to Lauren on the couch and gently brought up what she had noticed. And by the way, these are all kind of anonymous names. Mum says, Lauren, I notice that you seem a bit upset every time we talk about me and Daddy going away at the weekend. I'm wondering how you feel about it. Lauren, I'm fine, Mum. Well, no, actually, I'm not. I'm so annoyed with myself. I know in my head everything will be fine and I'll be safe. I just hate thinking about your trip and I just don't know how to make it better. Mum, my poor Laurie, so you feel really worried about us going away for a few nights. You're annoyed with yourself because you know everything will be fine. It sounds like you're struggling with that. Mum holds on to Lauren's hand and takes a few deep breaths to anchor herself and Lauren in the moment and to help her feel understood and connected. I'm wondering what part of us going away you feel you're most struggling with. Lauren, I don't know. Maybe all of it. No, not all of it. I'm not worried as much about the weekend as I am about the Friday when we have to say goodbye. Yeah, that's it. It's the Friday I'm dreading. Mum, so you're more worried about the Friday than the weekend. What do you think it is about the Friday you're dreading? Lauren, it's the thought of saying goodbye to you at school that really upsets me. All the kids will be around me and I just know no matter how much I try, I'm going to cry. Then I'll be so embarrassed I'll have to spend the whole day in class upset and missing you. Mum, that's really difficult for you, Lauren, to imagine saying goodbye to me at school and feeling scared that you might cry in front of your friends and be upset for the day. Mum hugs Lauren. I'm really going to miss you too. Mum waits until Lauren seems calm enough to make a suggestion. I wonder would it help at all if we weren't to say goodbye at school and said our goodbyes at home instead? Lauren, you mean like say goodbye here and then ask Granny to bring me into school? Mum, sure, why not? That sounds like a good idea. I could ask Granny and let the school know too. I'm sure it would be okay. Your older brother can make his own decision. Lauren, thank you, Mummy. That would be so much better, so that if I get upset, then I'll be able to cry and snuggle into you for a while before going to school and facing everyone. Mum, you seem so relieved. I'd love to snuggle with you because I know how much I'll miss you and how happy I'll be to see you again on Sunday. Lauren, will Granny think my worry is silly though? Mum, I very much doubt it. When she was your age, your Auntie Libby got upset every time Granny went for a visit. So it's an okay feeling to have and one that Granny is well used to. Lauren, that's funny thinking of Libby getting upset. Look at her now. She's so ultra brave. So this is an exact example of how if the parent kind of takes a breath, and obviously the child wasn't in deep fight or flight mode, but it was about having that conversation, connecting with Lauren, and also the mum using touch and reflecting back what she was hearing. So rather than denying it, she was trying to unpack it. The second you start unpacking your child's worry, you're showing them that you care and that you want to find out more. You're exploring it as opposed to denying it or minimizing it. So empowerment is all about mindfulness meets kindfulness. So this is the fourth step in my book, okay? It's where the child is ready now to use reasoning and problem solving because you have used self-care, you've anchored them to safety, you've helped them to feel felt, and now we're at the E of this, we're at the empowerment stage of the safe approach. By the way, it's called the safe approach because it's all about safety first. And we've already spoken to Louise Shanahar about mindfulness meets kindfulness. We've spoken to Siobhan Prendeville. You've seen that about playing with anxiety. And the next kind of therapy that really helps very well with anxiety for young people is cognitive-behavioural therapy. So the next interview that I have is with Pamela Carroll Mannion, who is not only a CBT psychotherapist who works privately. I met her when I was working in CAMS in Sligo many years ago. She's a very good friend of mine as well. She can be contacted there, PamelaCarrollMannion@gmail.com. She works privately. She also has worked in NUIG and she's fantastic with young people. And in this video, I ask her to tell me what is CBT, how CBT can help young people with anxiety by looking at the relationship between their thoughts, feelings, behaviours and physical sensations. She'll tell us more about that and what can parents do to help their children. I really hope you enjoy this video.
CBT works together with parents and young people to help them learn about and manage their anxiety differently. So at the first session when parents come in with a young person, I will always say to them, listen, let me learn about you. You know you better than anybody knows you. Mm-hmm. And I know some stuff that can help you learn about and manage your anxiety a whole lot better. When young people come in, obviously their thinking can be quite negative, they're feeling awful in their bodies, and they're not living life in the way that they would like to. Yeah. So together we come up with lots of different ways to help them deal with that anxiety. And in order to do that, we set some goals for therapy. So what do they want to get out of the sessions? And it is the young people that do that. Mum and dad can contribute, but because this is about the young person and it's very important that it is about them. And, you know, as I said, they're the most important people in the room. They set the goals and we work together on achieving those goals.
Pam, I'm just wondering, is having anxiety like a bad thing? Like, would young people coming into you and parents and say, I want to get rid of my anxiety, what would you say to them?
Well, firstly, anxiety is certainly not a bad thing. It's a very normal thing because it protects us from harm or danger. So CBT or any other psychotherapy will not help anybody get rid of their anxiety because that isn't possible. But it will give you lots of very useful ways to manage it. So we develop an anxiety toolkit, not an anxiety destroyer. So lots of different ways to deal with it. Yeah.
Brilliant. And can you give me an example for parents that are listening tonight of an anxious young person using this kind of CBT lens that you have? Give me an example.
CBT looks at the relationship between thoughts, feelings, behaviour and physical sensations. Okay. So if I give you an example of very typically most young people, when you ask them about their least favourite subjects at school, they'll say maths. They get really worried about their maths test. So typical thoughts can be, what if I fail or I don't do well? What if I let my parents down? Other people are better than me. I'm no good at maths. So they're feeling disappointed, they're feeling scared, they're feeling worried, they're feeling upset. The physical symptoms that they feel in their body can be those kind of You hear about a lot of headaches, those pains
Stomach
in the tummy,
aches,
and heart palpitations. And the behaviours can be that, you know, they withdraw from friends, maybe don't want to go to do the maths test, maybe they don't even want to go to school, and there can be angry outbursts at home. So that's what, you know, they're the kind of the main features we look at. Then we look at, you know, maybe the mistakes, because anxiety, you know, it causes us not to think properly.
Okay.
So we don't quite get the full picture. So what mistakes are we making in our thinking? So are we jumping to conclusions? Are we mind reading? Are we catastrophizing? So we look and see, are we getting the full picture here? And then we challenge some of those thoughts. So we kind of question it a little bit more to get
and
a more
you do
balanced
something with
picture.
their behavior as well, don't you? What would you do with that?
Absolutely. Well, you know, with behavior, we always look at, you know, things like, are you eating well? Are you sleeping well? Are you getting exercise? We do some kind of breathing exercises and relaxation to bring down that horrible feeling of anxiety in their body, so they can access their thinking more easily when we go around challenging the thoughts.
Perfect.
So we say when this young person has to go back into the maths test, that they will kind of do their breathing, challenge their thinking, and they feel more confident in having to do it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And if there's something parents can do, what can they best do to help their anxious children, Pam? What would you suggest?
Oh, definitely. The first thing you do is you talk to your child about it. You know, pick a time where you're feeling calm, they're feeling calm, you've plenty of time to talk, you're feeling strong, you're looking after yourself as a parent, so you're able for whatever it is your child is going to tell you. And whatever they do tell you, reassure them. No worry is a silly worry. If it's causing them distress, you need to hear about it, and they need to tell you about it. So they need to feel listened to.
And in my book, I talk about a worry box. Do you use
absolutely.
that? Yeah.
Yes, worry boxes are absolutely fantastic to get the ball rolling, to literally open up that communication about worry. It's a really good option to have, Malie. Yeah. Brilliant.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Pam. I just really appreciate everything that you've done. And if anybody wants to contact Pamela, as I said, she's a private psychotherapist, CBT psychotherapist, and there are the contact details for you. Thank you so much, Pamela.
Thank you, Malie, and good luck with your book. It's fantastic, everybody. It really is fantastic.
Thank you so much. I want to thank Pamela Carroll Mannion so much for talking to us about how CBT can help young people with anxiety. And as she said, no worry is a silly worry, and it's all about developing an anxiety toolkit rather than an anxiety destroyer. This next slide, it kind of, I was inspired by Dr. Brendan Kelly, who's a psychiatrist who wrote a book called Coping with Coronavirus last year. And he gave his top tips for managing difficult feelings when I was doing a webinar with him for Dublin Book Festival a few months ago. And he talked about the importance of parents and children and teens taking holidays from COVID in our heads, trying not to carry around a global pandemic on our shoulders all day long, and that it's important that we enjoy time doing other things as opposed to be thinking constantly about threats, and that it's important for us to focus on the present as much as we can. He talked also about focusing on your body instead of your mind and on the here and now, and that's why it helps so much to be out in nature and to be involved doing things that keep you present. And children really keep you present, I must say. Leaning on others for support. I know we haven't been able to connect with one another as much, you know, in the same way over the last year, but it's still really important to have those connections with other people, whatever way you can. And also for us to maybe ask ourselves the questions, what parts of normal are worth rushing back to when this ends? You know, are there things that you have found out about yourselves as a family or as an individual that you would like to bring forward with you? And that might be an exercise or something you do with your kids, and ask them what were the more negative sides, but what parts of now would you like to keep forward with you? And then I suppose the self-compassion break is all about, you know, this idea of when you're going through a difficult moment, noticing this moment of suffering, kind of saying, this is hurtful for me right now, or this is what it feels like to be, you know, a stressed out parent in this moment. And soothing touch, putting your hand on your heart or your cheek or hugging yourself and kind of saying, may I be kind to myself in this moment? May I accept this moment exactly as it is? May I accept myself in this moment exactly as I am? May I give myself all the compassion I need to respond to this moment wisely. And I have some lovely compassion resources in the COVID-19 resources section of my website, drmaliecoyne.ie, where there are some free meditations that are kind of compassion-based self-kindness meditations. This self-compassion break comes from Kristen Neff, and she's got an amazing website with some audio recordings on it too. So the next question and answer, I did a Q&A with Brian Penny, who I'll tell you about him now. He is a fellow author, a friend, a public speaker, a PhD candidate, a university lecturer, a life change strategist. He wrote an amazing book last year called Bonus Time, which detailed his experience with drug addiction and how he healed from that and all the learnings he's had. And he asked me a few weeks ago, could I do a question and answer session on Instagram, because lots of parents were asking him questions about how to help their kids with anxiety. And in this particular clip, we go through lots of questions on sleep issues and nightmares, which have been, I suppose, sleep issues have been more difficult for children during this time, and nightmares, and how to help children using playful ways. And this is just one question that I answered for Brian. But if you want the whole Instagram live, which is about 40 minutes, you can go on to the front page of my website, drmaliecoyne.ie, to get the full 40-minute Q&A. Okay, see you in a little while.
There's loads of questions, Malie, about sleep, and I think we could put a few of them together. So a lot of them around like the children sleeping, and I personally know a lot of parents that are struggling with their kids sleeping, and I think because the parents are out of sync with their sleep, and I think that we're all out of sync a little bit with sleep because the structure's gone.
Yeah.
So with bad sleep, nightmares, any thoughts on that? What you could do there?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose to know that, children are carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders at the moment, as our parents. We've had a really difficult year. We need to acknowledge that for ourselves. We've been going through this for a year, and it's like, there's no sign of it going away right now. And I think, nightmares and sleep issues and all of that are really kind of, they can be normal enough at this stage, and we're all out of routine. But just to say that being playful can really help. I know you don't feel like being playful at 3 a.m. when your child has woken you up with a nightmare, right? But say, I'll give you an example. Say they're going to bed at night and they say there's a monster in the room. And a 5, 6-year-old, 7-year-old can truly believe there's a monster in the room, rather than saying to them, there's no monster in the room, monsters don't exist, and, being frustrated about it. Then turn that down and bring the playful side in, because I tell you, the second you bring play into your relationship with your child's anxiety, it immediately reduces their anxiety. So what you're saying is, I wonder what we could do with that monster. Oh God, I remember being your age and being afraid of monsters. And of course, parents are afraid to do this because they don't want to make it real that monsters exist. But kids love this. It's not that they're necessarily thinking, oh, this monster really exists, but it's like, I wonder, can we find a jar and put a really nice little gems into the jar, something really nice, so that the monster gets trapped. If there's a monster, they would get trapped in the actual jar. Or else you could say, oh, I have this really good spray that totally sprays out any monsters out of this room. Or I know that teddy, that teddy looks like he means business. That teddy will definitely help with the monster. Do you know what I mean? So kind of, and then in the middle of the night, you could even say to them, if they've had a nightmare, kind of really reassure them that it's okay for them to come to you with a nightmare. I know it's really difficult at times, but reverse psychology works really well here, where you kind of let them know, first of all, thank God we don't go back into nightmares again. When we have a nightmare, we don't ever go back into it again. Even dreams that we love, we can't will ourselves to dream the same dream, even though we try. It doesn't work. But it doesn't work with nightmares either. We will never go back into the same nightmare the same night. So kind of letting them know that. And with my daughter, what I do is I bring her downstairs, get her a little glass of milk, maybe a cracker if she feels like it, whatever. But sometimes we don't. And then I might just stay with her and say, I won't talk to her exactly about the nightmare, because I don't think that's a good idea at 4 a.m. Okay, I really don't. Kind of letting her know, we'll chat about it tomorrow, but I'm here for you. And then say to her, you tell me when you want me to go. So I will be holding on to her and not in bed with her because she's at the top bunk, but I'll just say, you tell me when you want me to go. And then, a child might want their parent to stay for a good while initially, but when they know they have control over when the separation happens, within a few days, I promise you, they'll go, you go now, mommy, you go. I'm okay, you go. Yeah. So just knowing that you're available and that they can have you as long as they need you, and that they have the power, and that you bring play into it when it's appropriate, can really help.
Yeah, and the whole thing is, it's empowering the kids with the empowering their feelings and their beliefs around them also, and then empowering them to let you know when it's time to go. So you're giving them the power, and that takes away the anxiety. It makes so much sense, because you're giving them power, and the what is anxiety? It's like fear. Power is the opposite of fear. In one, it's a lovely way of putting it.
Thanks so much to Brian for that. As Brian said, power is the opposite of fear. If you want to hear more about Brian's work, go to brianpenny.com. For more of our Q&A, as I said, go to the front page of my website, where we talk about how to help children who struggle with negative self-talk, how to help kids through their negative emotions, using validation, the power of the breath, tuning into your gut instinct. And I suppose this last slide is parenting. Perfection isn't possible. Be good enough and learn more every day. I have written before for the Irish Independent on what the 3 pillars, and also for RTE Brainstorm, if you want to look them up, the 3 pillars of good enough parenting, which I would kind of include as the importance of learning to trust your gut instinct as a parent, and realizing the treasure trove of qualities you already have as a parent can help you to develop this lens through which you filter all the advice that's out there, because there's so much and out there, and becoming more attuned to your gut instinct and learning to trust yourself, which requires a lot of self-kindness, support from others, and lots of practice. The second pillar would be letting go of the fallacy of perfection, that, life isn't black or white, it's million shades of grey. And it's important for us not to try to reach perfection, because otherwise we're modelling that for our children. And then striving for good enough self-acceptance is a more realistic ideal for parents, as it enables a greater sense of emotional balance and calm. And I suppose seeking professional support if this is too difficult for you, or you feel it's too hard. Pillar 3 being getting to know yourself and as a parent, and prioritizing self-care, like what we said earlier. And how it's so important to do that and to recognize your feelings, because if you do that, it enables you to take a step back from your children's emotions to decide on how you might compassionately respond to them. And so if you're feeling overwhelmed, we're less able to do that. Whereas if our cup is fuller, we're more able to do that. As Louise said about, pouring from, we can only give from our cup what we have in our cup. So I think that's really important. So finally, I just want to thank you. And that's my book, Love In, Love Out. And my website is drmaliecoyne.ie. And finally, I want to give a special thank you to Galway Public Libraries for inviting me to do this talk for you, which I hope that you have found helpful to you. I want to thank the amazing contributors, Louise Shanahar, Siobhan Prendeville and Pamela Carroll Mannion, as well as Brian Penny, for their wonderful, wonderful contributions. If you want to know anything more about my work, or want to know more about my book, you can go on to drmaliecoyne.ie, or you can follow me on social media. In terms of my book, Love In, Love Out, it's available in all bookshops, online, and hopefully at your library as well. And there's lots of resources at the back of the book in terms of practical exercises that you can use with children, in terms of making a fear ladder, making a worry box. Lots of lovely mindfulness exercises in there that Louise Shanahar helped me with as well. And also there's recommended websites, storybooks, workbooks for use with children, apps to help, online resources and meditation. So I hope that you will find that really helpful. Most of all, I hope that this talk has helped parents and anybody who works with children to understand that anxiety is normal, to facilitate that communication with a child who feels anxious, and also the importance of self-compassion, because I suppose if we can pour love into ourselves, then we're better able to extend love out to our children. So that really was the most important point for me. So thank you so much for listening to this talk, and I wish you love and light. Goodbye.